After weeks of international appeals and negotiations, Israel has agreed to daily pauses in the war in Gaza.
The White House says Israel has agreed to daily 4-hour humanitarian pauses.
A 3-hour notice period will be issued ahead of these pauses.
The United States calls it a humanitarian pause. The Israeli army calls them tactical, localized pauses. 2 corridors out of the north to allow civilians in Gaza to move south.
It's the first very limited, very partial agreement that the two sides have come to, but it is the first.
The White House says Israel will pause its military operations for 4 hours daily in northern Gaza.
The fact that this announcement came from the White House is important, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's understand what's in this agreement. In theory, the pause would allow for 3 immediate things. It would help aid groups get food and supplies into Gaza. It would allow for foreign nationals in northern Gaza to travel to the Rafah border crossing. And it would mean that Palestinians who are still in the north, where the heaviest fighting has been, would be able to evacuate south.
Each day you're going to have these corridors. The idea is to get the Palestinian civilians out of the war zone so that Israel can attack the headquarters and command centers of Hamas.
According to the White House, there will be 2 humanitarian corridors, allowing people to escape the violence in the northern part of Gaza. One of them has been partially open for several days now, according to Israel.
Yesterday, 50,000 people walked down during that time. Today, tens of thousands also left.
The second route along the coastal road will enable many more thousands to reach safer areas in the south.
Another part of the agreement is that civilians will get 3 hours notice when and where these pauses will happen. The Israeli Defense Forces posted that on X yesterday, saying that the pauses will be limited in time and area.
In specific locations for a given period of a few hours here, a few hours there, we want to facilitate a safe passage of civilians away from the zone of fighting, and we're doing that.
Since the conflict began, Israel has repeatedly told civilians to evacuate south. A lot of the fighting and targeted airstrikes have been happening in northern Gaza, which the Israeli army says is a Hamas stronghold with several targets.
Israel's military says Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza as thousands of Palestinians are moving south to flee that fighting.
But civilians in Gaza have repeatedly said there isn't anywhere for them to go. And for many, nowhere in Gaza feels safe.
For this young girl, Gaza's south was supposed to be safer. Israel's military again encouraging people to flee here, but still hitting what it says are Hamas targets in the area. In the rubble, children's possessions, lives devastated.
The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 11,000 Palestinians have been killed since the war began. While calls for a humanitarian pause have been happening for weeks, experts say that even with this agreement, there are cautions.
Lots of things could go wrong here. You could stop firing and then one lone fighter on either side fires, and that breaks the pause right away. People fire back. Because the Israeli Defense Forces and the Hamas fighters don't withdraw from their position. And they're exposed, right? Because it's just a pause. So they are very easily broken by a lone incident which starts things going again.
Which is why the United States has been pushing for something even more substantial.
President Biden had asked the Israeli Prime Minister for a 3-day pause in order to facilitate hostage release, but also to get significant amounts of aid in. This is definitely something that the Americans have been pushing relentlessly through the president, through their special envoy on the ground, through the Secretary of State.
U.S. officials haven't confirmed how many Americans are being held hostage by Hamas, but we know there are still Americans unaccounted for.
How do you remove the hostages from the tunnel? They have to assemble in a safe place. They have to cross the border, or they have to be picked up by a helicopter. You need to be sure that there's no firing during an operation like that.
But for now, at least, the Americans say it's progress.
We believe that this is an important step in the right direction.
From a military perspective, a pause is a negative. From a humanitarian perspective, a pause is absolutely urgent.
War is volatile, violent, and unpredictable. Things can shift. And for civilians in Gaza, this could all fall apart as quickly as it came together.